welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Monday, November 1st. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. Many of the stories read here can also be found at our website at IndianCountryNews.com. And here are some of the news stories for the day from the Associated Press and other Native news sources. The Hopi High School radio broadcast and journalism clubs are raising money so they can attend the conference, the National Journalism Education Association Conference in Oregon, April 14th through the 18th. The radio club is attempting to raise $14,000 so they can send 10 students and 2 chaperones to learn more about how they can become empowered through communications. The trip will cost approximately $1,200 per person for the airfare, hotel, and other things. Hopi High School will match the money that the club raises. Any donations are greatly appreciated. The Hopi High School Radio Club performs the only live remote Native American high school teen folk show from 1:30 to 2:30 p.m. every day, every other Tuesday on KUY, which is the Hopi community radio station. Checks should be made out to the Hopi High School Radio Club, and you can get more information by calling Stan Bindell at 928-738-5111. And that's extension 241, and we'll put that phone number up there so you can see that. 9 losing candidates in the primary election for Rocky Boy's Indian Reservation's tribal council have filed a lawsuit to overturn the primary results and stop the general election for the tribe on November 2nd. The group in the suit, filed late last week, contends the Rocky Boy Election Committee failed to properly conduct background checks as required by the Chippewa Cree tribe and eliminate unqualified candidates. The group is requesting a new election be scheduled. And today, we go to Shoshone Bannock tribal member Mark Trahant for one final discussion regarding the midterm elections here on November 2nd and what it might mean to Indian country.
Mark Trahant, November 2nd is Election Day, and more than ever before, it seems like some politicians believe that the native vote is the block vote, the swing vote, the balance of power, which may elect them. What kind of predictions are you making for the midterm elections this year?
Well, I think like everyone, I'm pretty gloomy about what the midterm elections mean. But let's talk about a couple places where it's interesting. One is the Alaska Native corporations all come out on the side of Lisa Murkowski. Many village leaders have come out on her side. The Alaska Federation of Natives is on her side. So all of the institution from the state is on her side. But I'm not sure that's how it's going to play out. When it gets down to people in the voting booth, they may end up voting from village level for the Democrat. And even if that happens in small numbers, that could tip the election. It's pretty clear that the Republican or official Republican Joe Miller is losing steam at this point. Sarah Palin tried to pick it up last week, but I don't think it's working. So it's going to be a very interesting race.
Looking at the polls, from what I can tell, it looks like he's gone from something like 60% down to 22% recently. So that's not
from first to worst.
Indeed. And so now it's become, in particular, what appears to be a race between the Democratic candidate and a write-in candidate. The
Right.
Democratic candidate is courting the natives, in part because my understanding his wife is a native, Alaskan native.
Right.
On the Democratic ticket, you have a lieutenant governor's race as well, which could draw native people out. So in Alaska, it's the 14 to 20%, depending on how you look. Some districts very high, but statewide, 14%, let's just say 14%, is an absolutely big voting block that could carry either Murkowski into it or wherever it goes.
If you go back to the primary, Diane Benson, who's the native we just mentioned, basically wiped everybody out in the primary and was primarily the native vote that did that. She's very interesting. She was one of the original Ice Road truckers before there was a TV show. She was hauling stuff from the Ice Road down to Fairbanks, and well, that's quite a thing to have on your resume.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like the snowplow guys up in the Rocky Mountains. There's a few monuments for them where they went over the edge, and that was it.
Yeah,
But they got
exactly.
out there and did that. We had some champion explorers, and people were willing to do something. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting
One of the
situation.
things that kind of in a broader view that concern me about this election is that the policies that are being presented, and for the most part, the Republicans, but many of the Democrats are right there too, are what I would term deflationary in nature. And that's that they want to shrink the size of government, but they're not thinking through the consequences of what that means. You shrink through the government, that means shrinking jobs, that means shrinking output, that means shrinking programs, all of which will have a profound effect on Indian country.
And what are we looking for? Are we looking for some delicate balance between this whole thing, stimulus monies, programs in the community, infrastructure building? I think everyone is definitely concerned about the national debt and what it means, or at least people who are aware of what it might mean.
Oh, absolutely. But you have to look at that over the long period, not just a short period. And if you look at it over the long haul, if we go into a deflationary spin, which is what's happened in Japan over the last 10 years, it's been much worse in Japan than here. And I'll just give you one number as an example. Right now, if you break down the federal debt, each of us owes $34,000 to the federal treasury per person. In Japan, it's over 75,000, and that's after 10 years of deflation. So you can see kind of what the long-term prospects of that are.
There's some people who are saying that we may be stuck in a Japanese-style economic quagmire of some kind, where we're just going to have to settle in for this kind of a lifestyle for a while.
Right, right. I mean, so much of it goes back to what we're doing with housing and that sort of thing. But absolutely, our policies are keeping us stuck rather than moving us forward.
What do you see going on with some of the other races? You're keeping an eye on the Kaufman race in the state of Washington?
Right, and that's going to be a tough race for Claudia Kaufman. She's fighting an uphill battle. I will say that of all the candidates out there, she works about as hard or harder than anybody. So if she's going to pull it off, it'll be because of her hard work.
And we've got a huge race down in Arizona with the Secretary of State, Chris. We've talked a little bit about that before. Maybe some demoralized voters on the Navajo Nation.
Right. The Navajo Nation is a big wild card in this because it is so chaotic right now with what's going on. I thought it was really interesting this week. National Public Radio did a story about the potential first woman president of the Navajo Nation, which is a legitimate story.
Right.
But they didn't mention the chaos going on with so many of the candidates being under criminal indictment.
77 of 88 now, and my understanding is some of those warrants will now begin to go outside of the legislative council down there, so people are looking at that. The question is whether or not it'll suppress voters because they're not happy with it. Are there voting trends on the Navajo Nation that are typical? Are they typically Democrat, Republican?
Typically 9-10 to 1 Democrat. John McCain did cut into that a little bit, but and he may still get some of those crossover votes, but not nearly enough to change the outcome.
No, that's just about the opposite. What my understanding is voters are in Oklahoma. My understanding is in Oklahoma there wasn't a single county that voted Democratic, and some of those counties are heavily populated with conservative Native Americans.
Oh, I've experienced that firsthand when I've talked to people down there. And it's pretty clear that there is a different side of thinking.
Yeah.
Which is okay. I mean, you need to have that balance.
Do you find historically, and I've looked at this a little bit around here, I find that Native voters, while tending to be in the Democratic Party, are very typically conservative Democratic voters, and then you got the more liberal Republicans, but the thinking is that the Native community trends toward small government. No state, county, military service, pro-life.
I think all of those are fair game. I think where it comes down to is actually program money and how do you get enough money to reservation communities. And that's something that they often end up being on the short side of.
And the Native community found themselves in the Democratic Party along with a whole hodgepodge of other subgroups of people who feel accepted there.
Right.
Come Wednesday morning, we're going to wake up. We're quite possibly going to have a House dominated by Republicans. The Senate seems to be on the balance. Are there going to be compromises or more stalemate?
I think more stalemate for the next 2 years. One interesting thing to watch is if the Republicans do capture the Senate by even a vote, will they change the rules and end filibuster? Right now, you need 60 votes to get anything done, but that's something that can be changed with the rules, and the incoming Senate can change the rules. And so that'll be very interesting to watch.
Are the Republicans going to be able to, if that's the case, are they going to be able to rein in? Are they going to make good on their promises that they're making to people? They're talking about going back to the 2008 budget. They're talking about lots of things. Are they going to be able to accomplish that with Obama at the lead?
They can wreak a lot of havoc on the budget, particularly because you don't need 60 votes for that. So if they can get a working majority, they can start cutting the budget. The thing that just bugs me to no end is when you look at the deficit and what it causes it, the actual federal spending is a minor part of that. Really, it boils down to two things, and that is entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, and the military. And once you take those two things out of the equation, federal spending itself is a pretty small part of the mix.
Have you ever seen any figures on what percentage of American Indians are now voting? I mean, 25, 30 years ago, I think if you would have gone onto an Indian reservation, it would have been hard to find 10% of the population signed up.
That's a good question. No, I'd like to look and see what the data says on that.
I think that with the growth of Native voters, they've changed the dynamics of the races
Right.
and certainly impacted policy at the local level where people now have to come out to the reservation and campaign.
Oh, Montana's a great example of that. I mean, Montana, it's now part of the deal.
That's interesting because I was going to bring it up. I know there's a couple people up there. I know Jonathan Windyboy had been in the state legislature for a while there, and because of that, got up and said some things for people who were pretty ill prepared to talk about Native Americans in the Montana legislature in the past.
Right.
Any wild cards you see anywhere?
Well, to me, the biggest wild card is Alaska. I think it's just fascinating what happens up there.
We'll have to watch because if they put people in power, a lot of times politicians are down there the next day saying, look, I owe you guys. You know, I mean, literally, let's work together. It's not like they're going to hand out commodity cheese and fry bread to everyone, but in the long run, they now know who their constituency is.
Absolutely. It'll be fun.
What is the fry bread element in this?
Well, that's interesting. In South Dakota, the Republican Party has been upset with number of feeds to get out the vote, and they're saying that's an illegal bribe of people. And it's really a silly issue because feeding people has been part of electioneering really since democracy began. And it's only this particular election and in South Dakota and on reservations where they're starting to call it into question. In fact, Gay Kingman had a nice post on Facebook the other day where she showed a number of Republican feeds going back several years.
Well, there you go. We'll have to call it out in the Indian country vote. We'll call it the fry bread factor, and we'll see what happens, man. Good talking to you, Mark. Let's come together maybe tomorrow night, maybe Wednesday. Take a look at what the landscape looks like, and go on from there.
Okay. And I'll be writing Tuesday night, so folks can follow me if they want to go to www.marktrahant.com.
Sounds good, Mark. Thanks for joining with us today.
Okay.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to thank you all for joining in. Don't forget to vote. Miigwech.